Math from the Naval Research Lab showing how, with getting signals from 4 different satellites, you could get again your 3D position plus time. So, next slide, please. All right, we'll briefly go through the GPS satellites. I know I've got experts here, but Block 1 launched 11 satellites, 10 of which worked. You notice Block 1, 1978, we had the 3 that were used along with NTS-2, which was the last Time-Nation satellite, to prove that GPS would work. 78 through 85. You notice Block 1, which were the test, and Block 2, which is the operational. There's a 4-year time lag here. Well, Challenger blew up in January of 1986, and Congress, in its infinite wisdom in the 1970s, mandated that government satellites like GPS would be launched aboard the shuttle. So when the shuttle blew up, the Air Force had to devise rockets, unmanned rockets, to get it up. So Block 2, 9 satellites, none of them are currently used, launched 89 to 90. Block 2A, A stands for advanced, launched 90 through 97. 8 are residual, so they're not being used in the constellation, but they're available in case there are problems. Next slide, please. 2R for replenishment, launched 97 through 2004. You notice 7.5-year design life, and the oldest is 19 years old. So the people running GPS are definitely doing a good job in terms of getting satellites that will last longer than design. Next slide. 2RM for modernization. 7 operational, 1 residual. They added a second civilian navigation signal, which is not fully utilized. Next slide, please. 2F for follow-up. These again added a 3rd civil navigation signal, which again is not fully operational. The L5, which is also going to be used by the Europeans in their Galileo. Next slide, please. And GPS-3, which is probably the bane of the existence of some people here. It will be more powerful, but of course currently it needs the new operational system, OCX. It's possible we may modify the current system to be able to use GPS-3. But again, GPS-3 will be more powerful, more signals, and you can see that's a general trend. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so today you've got 31 healthy satellites. Due to the restrictions, you can't use more than 32. OCX will make it easier to control more. 8 residuals. So again, these are available in case something goes wrong with the existing one. And range error in space, 0.6 of a meter, 1 to 3 meters, accuracy on the ground, and of course, using ground stations along with GPS, you can get much greater accuracy than that. Greater than 1 billion civilian and commercial GPS receivers in use worldwide. Next slide, please. So GPS is such a good thing, everyone wants one. The Russians started, the first GPS Block 1 test satellite was launched in '78. The Russians launched their first, except the Soviet Union then, their GLONASS system in 1982. When the Soviet Union broke up, GLONASS fell into problems, but they've since built it back up. They have 25 satellites. The US had selective availability, which degraded the civilian signal, turned off in the year 2000, but selective availability did not make people like the Europeans happy. So they decided they needed their own GNSS. Again, GPS is the first and best GNSS, but it's one of 4 with worldwide ambitions. And the Chinese originally were cooperating with the Europeans in Galileo, but then they pulled out and started their own system. And there are also two regional systems. Japan is particularly interested with GPS's line of sight system. So if you're in Tokyo, you may not be able to fully use it. So the Japanese have satellites in geosynchronous orbits to work with GPS, and the Indians similarly. Next slide.
Okay, the next couple of slides come from the GSA, the European agency that runs theirs. You'll see here that this comes from their fourth market study that was released in 2015. They analyzed 300 plus receivers, chipsets, and modules that were offered by the top 31 global companies. In 2014, they calculated that there were 3.6 billion GNSS receivers worldwide. Many people think that's now 4 billion. The phones are being sold everywhere across the globe. People are turning in their Apple iPhones. They're being resold in the latest show places. So if you look, GPS is inherent in 100% of the systems. That's why GPS is the gold standard. Next slide, please. However, while GPS is in all of the devices, only 40% of devices today rely solely on GPS. The two systems that have been around the longest, GPS and GLONASS, comprise this large green segment in the category that use two, but you'll notice in the category that receives signals from all four constellations, that is the fastest growing category, and it now tops 20%. Next slide, please. So when we start thinking about what GPS means to the public and how we got here, there's a lot of confusion about when GPS became public. And so it's important to realize that dual military-civilian use was designed into the system from the very beginning. And this document, the NAVSTAR Global Positioning System Program Management Plan, on July 15, 1974, this was just after the JPO was formed, which set the official policy, said the clear acquisition signal will serve as an aid to the acquisition of the P precise signal, and will also provide a navigation signal in the clear to both the military and civil user. Next slide, please. So GPS actually made its civilian debut 8 years before its military debut. And at this time in 1982, there were only 6 GPS satellites in orbit. And the first method of using those signals was the micrometer V1000. It used very long baseline interferometry, a technique to calculate the distance between two ground stations by measuring the phase differences of the radio signals. And of course that clues you in. You need 2 of these. They're $250,000 a piece. They weigh 200 pounds when you add together the big base unit and the heavy antenna. They're bulky. These were often hauled into sites tethered under helicopters. And then they had to be repositioned each day. And then after they had done the surveying, they took cartridges back in the lab and loaded it on the computers to run the surveys. This very long baseline interferometry system was developed by Charles Councilman III and Hans Hendricker. One thing I wanted to mention here is that they used this to track Apollo astronauts driving around on the moon, and that work was funded by the Air Force Geophysics Laboratory. That's on the back for that. Councilman was a consultant to Macrometrics and assigned the patents over. The patents for this have been the applicable patents on virtually every GPS receiver sold in the United States since. Next slide, please. Now, The Soviet shoot-down of Korean airliner 007, September 1st, 1983, is when the public has somehow mistakenly been trained to think that GPS became public. We have here the quote from Larry Speaks saying that the president had agreed to make GPS available to civilian aircraft. On the Reagan Library's website, I've gone through looking for these executive orders that were supposedly issued. If it was an executive order to make something public, I don't think it would be classified and hidden. I can't find an order like that. This is actually the only reference to GPS I can find on the Reagan website. What Reagan was actually doing was a great thing, which was encouraging civilian aircraft industry to use GPS. But what we should point out is that the civilian airliners had been encouraged to participate in some kind of satellite navigation going back all the way to 1970 by the Navigation Executive Steering Group, NAVSEG. Next slide, please. We spoke a little bit about the Challenger explosion. That set the Air Force back about 2 years in launching GPS, but it did produce the Delta II rocket, which carried GPS satellites into orbit for 20 years. Next slide, please. So, almost everyone knows that GPS made its military debut in the Persian Gulf War. As we examined many of the particulars there, it just really becomes all the more impressive what happened here. On August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invades Kuwait. The United States that very day launched GPS Space Vehicle 21, bringing the constellation to 14. I find this an amazing historical coincidence that he would choose to invade Kuwait on the same day that we got the 14th one there. 2 more were launched on October 1st and November 22nd. We read places where it said they rushed GPS into service. Well, those were the dates that were planned. There was no capacity to really move that up in the short run of the war. But what folks here did was make complicated adjustments, and I have some of them listed here. During the crisis, a 12-year-old Block 1 satellite lost 40% of the power from its solar panels. Ground controllers shut down Donaldson's central power during episodes when the satellite was in Earth's shadow. A stabilizer on one satellite malfunctioned, and the solar panels on another became stuck, forcing controllers to make manual adjustments throughout the war. So this was really hands-on steering. It reminded me of the Apollo program, frankly, and some of the experimentation and workarounds that were done. Next slide, please. So, at the time, there were only 2 GPS-guided munitions. The Air Force had the conventional air-launched cruise missile. There were 35 used on the first day, launched from B-52s that had flown the longest to that date mission in the history of the B-52. This was top secret, classified, not known until exactly 1 year later, on January 16th, 1992. And there's a good reason for that. To create this GPS-guided weapon, the Air Force took the nuclear warhead and the inertial navigation system off of the 86B and replaced it with a conventional bomb and GPS guidance. And anyone seeing the B-52 flying out with those weapons would have assumed that nuclear war was imminent. The Navy weapon, the AGM-84, was also an existing modified missile, the standoff land attack missile. That had been a Harpoon missile. And so there were only a few of these available, basically the test versions, and that's why you only had 42 of them used during the war. Next slide, please. I should point out, 42 GPS-guided bombs, 10,468 guided bombs of all types, 210,000 unguided bombs. Where GPS really made the difference was on the ground. Now, because the system was not complete, the military really hadn't fielded the receivers yet. So there was a shortage during the entire war. Pentagon ordered 10,000, but the war was so short, most of them never made it in the theater. By the end of the war, there were a total of 4,490 commercial units and 842 military units. Because of this, selective availability was turned off and remained off throughout the war. And it's interesting to think that this great success that GPS had was done using basically the civilian signal. GPS enabled navigation across the featureless desert. Saddam Hussein expected an amphibious assault. He thought anybody else would have the same trouble in the desert his troops had in the desert. So it enabled the famous left hook maneuver, which shifted 200,000 troops and tens of thousands of vehicles undetected more than 200 miles to the west to flank Iraq's entrenched positions. Some of the more granular things that we found were that when the air war was to begin, they wanted to knock out 2 Iraqi radars, and the helicopters that flew in synchronized their signals, their clocks, to atomic time from the GPS satellites, because they had to hit these 2 radar stations that were, I think, 40 miles apart, 20 seconds apart, because obviously if you hit one, suddenly they were coming. So they synchronized their schedule with atomic time, and then when they got to the launch points that the helicopters behind them were going to launch Hellfire missiles from, they dropped green glow sticks at those coordinates. So GPS was used for that attack. During the remainder of the ground war, GPS helped to avoid fratricide and search and rescue missions. So after the war, the Air Force commissioned the Gulf War Air Power Survey. I don't know if you dug into that, but they concluded that unguided dumb bombs launched from smart platforms using GPS navigation achieved almost precision-guided accuracy. And so, next slide, please. After the war, the reviews of GPS, they were sometimes cautious, but they were uniformly positive. And the conduct of the Persian Gulf War, the final report to Congress, said GPS was used more extensively than planned and met navigation and positioning requirements. GPS should be considered for incorporation into all weapon systems and platforms. This has now largely occurred, and today the problem is not getting military units interested in using GPS. All of the worry is overdependence on GPS, and I'm sure that's what you all hear about every day. We read in the popular press, and there are things I'm sure we don't know about, but the experience you're doing with coauthors, with atomic chip scale, inertial navigation, things of that nature. One of the things we want to say is that the public is not as clued in on the overdependence of GPS. They're not thinking about what to do if GPS goes out. So, next slide, please. There may be a newer national risk estimate that is classified. This is the one that's been released to the public in 2011. The increasing convergence of critical infrastructure dependency on GPS services with the likelihood that threat actors will exploit their awareness of that dependency presents a growing risk to the United States. I think most units of government and the military are up to date on this, but again, the public is not there. Most of the public doesn't. I run into people constantly and they don't realize that GPS is provided by the Air Force. I guess they think it's just a magical thing that's out there. Next slide, please. So when we talk about how the public became reliant on the military system, obviously the dual use was built in, but some other things factor in here, and very, very important is miniaturization. If GPS receivers have not shrunk to a convenient size, its adoption by the public would never have happened in the way that it did. And of course, there was a time in the mid-90s when there was consideration of forming a quasi-public body to run GPS. And the National Association of Public Administration and National Research Council did a joint study, and then a separate study by the RAND Corporation. All of them recommended leaving GPS under Air Force control for security reasons. They were afraid that someone would create a poor man's prudence. Of course, turning off selective availability in 2000 led to a consumer electronics boom. As GPS receivers became integrated with consumer electronics, eventually they found their way into phones, and the reason was because when phones first started coming out, 911 centers were getting overwhelmed with calls from people, and they'd say, well, what's your location? And they would have their car broken down or an accident in the middle of a forest or a field somewhere. They didn't have an address like you have with the landlines. They said, I don't know where I am. So they didn't know where to send help. So the FCC was really a driving force. They gave the wireless phone companies mandate after mandate that they kept pushing out. And the phone companies finally said, well, you know, in cities we can triangulate the calls from the cell towers, but you couldn't do that in rural areas, and GPS provided the answer. So that was one of the driving forces of GPS entering smartphones. And then, of course, there's the benefits of precise timing across many industries, and with the Air Force and the U.S. government providing 31 usable atomic clocks in the air all the time, people who need precise time, why should they buy their own atomic clock and keep it up? Next slide, please. So I thought you'd find these interesting. This is the incredible shrinking GPS receiver. This was the Rockwell Collins. Obviously, they expected it to shrink, but just imagine loading that onto the back of a plane, two people sitting at the console. Within a few years, backpack size, a couple more years, microwave oven size. Next slide, please. And by 88, car radio, dashboard radio. By 90, walkie-talkie size. By 93, GPS receivers are a component on other computer multi-chip modules. And next slide, please. By the time you had these multi-chip modules, this made it possible to have your famous suction cup on the windshield, TomTom Go navigator. The big change that put GPS into everyone's pocket was 3G. Apple released the iPhone. But now we've gone much farther, and now GPS receivers are so tiny that they end up in small tags to track pets, Alzheimer's patients, bags of money stolen from banks. The tracking possibilities everywhere. Next slide, please. So here is a partial list, and I know this is a busy slide, but that's for effect, because these are not all of the things, but these are the major things that GPS is used in civilian, scientific, and commercial activities. Next slide, please. You've got timing. This is and Symmetricon is no longer Symmetricon. I think they were bought. A typical GPS timing receiver put into a rack at maybe a data center, power substation. Insoles that can be placed in shoes in a memory care facility, so that if someone wanders away, they can be tracked. Earthquake monitoring. Hundreds of ground stations around the world. Ground stations in place with other trackers on bridges that can track tiny movements of bridges. And then, of course, ankle bracelets track the movements of parolees and probationers. Next slide, please. So a study a few years back said that GPS, the U.S. taxpayers had spent roughly $35 billion through 2010, and that it was costing about $1 billion a year. So I don't know if this figure is exactly right, but I think in the ballpark. Is that correct? Okay, so GPS, roughly $40 billion over 42 years. Obviously, it's three parts: the satellites, the ground control, and the military receivers are funded through the military budget. Augmentation systems, wide area augmentation, satellite base, the ground stations for the Coast Guard, they're funded through DOT and FAA largely. But then there's this huge civilian commercial receiver market. And this has proven to be very difficult for people to study. People haven't been keeping the numbers in a way uniformly from place to place, company to company, that makes it easy to see. But there have been some studies done. Next slide, please. A few years ago, a company called Light Squared wanted to put, right here, who doesn't know what Light Squared is? So at that time, this first study was done, NDP Consulting, and the fear was that those towers were going to knock GPS out for transportation, cause economic harm. So that study came up with GPS providing $68 to $122 billion in economic benefits to the U.S. annually, with an estimate that total disruption would cost our economy $96 billion per year. Next slide. Since that time, there have been more studies. The Europeans have studied it. A new study is sort of underway. Levison Consulting released last year a preliminary estimate. It's much more conservative. It's sort of built from the ground up. What are the sectors that were solid? These numbers are solid. And so he started building these up. So this conservative estimate, let me read what it excludes. Geographic information services, forestry, fisheries, mining and energy exploration, land and coastal management, weather, scientific applications in space, non-grain agriculture, construction and other moving, rail other than positive train control. So if these other sectors can ever be quantified, the number is going to be enormous. Next slide, please. A few examples of the sectors. Just grain precision agriculture, 10 to 17.7 billion. Next slide, please. Connected telematics and fleet vehicles, 7.6 to 16.3 billion. Next slide, please. Survey, 9.8 to 13.4 billion. Next slide, please. Earth moving with machine guidance, 2.2 to 7.7 billion. Next slide, please. There were some other data points of interest in this study. 900 million mobile phones that use GPS were sold worldwide in 2012. The United States has 188 million smartphone subscribers, 263 million internet users in 2013. 20% of mobile phone users get up-to-the-minute traffic information. And remember I said this didn't include GIS. The U.S. Geographic Information Systems industry is estimated at $73 billion, it was in 2011. And the worldwide economic benefits of GPS are much larger. This is just the United States. Next slide, please. So even by the most conservative estimates that exclude many sectors, the annual economic benefits in the United States are nearly equal to, you said, totaled up on the low end, 37 billion, the midpoint's 56 billion. At the very low end, they almost equal or exceed the total cost of GPS since its inception. And I think when you have conversations with civilians, and when you go to Capitol Hill, people start asking, is this worth it? That right there, to me, in 1 year's time, the benefits, it's paid back. It's the entire time. I don't know of any other government project that has done such a thing. Next slide, please. So we made this advantages and challenges chart. I don't know if we have it all exactly right, but we feel that the military status of GPS being in the military budget has protected it from some partisan budget battles. Maybe that, after some of the recent markup, doesn't ring quite true to some folks, but we feel like over time, as far as civilians go, this has been a net plus when you consider certain other infrastructure projects that have lagged behind, things like pipelines. On the other hand, the military status tends to reduce the general public's understanding of GPS, their reliance on it, and so the